It's ad break time. I'm proud to announce the Beyond Solitaire podcast is sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. Although the Kickstarter campaign for their next game, Hydrologic Cycle, has ended, I'll let you know when you can late pledge. CLGS also continues to offer classes in partnership with Gen Con. Jason Fury's Crowdfunding with Confidence starts today, May 6th, so if you're planning to register, you should probably contact them ASAP. Their next course will be Intermediate Role-Playing Game Design with Eloy Lasanta, which I know will be fantastic. Reports from his students have been nothing but glowing, and that one starts on Wednesday, June 19th. I'll also include a plug for myself. If you like the show and you want to support it, you can do so by going to patreon.com/beyondsolitaire. Thanks to listeners like you, I've been able to keep upgrading my equipment, subscribing to StreamYard, and more. But for now, let's get on with the show. Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm super happy this week. I have a very special guest on the podcast. This is Calvin Wong Tze Loon. He is a writer and game designer who has an absolutely fantastic project coming up. If you don't follow him on Twitter, it's time to find out. So how you doing, Calvin?
I'm doing great, especially great since they announced my board game. Keeping secrets is the worst part of this industry, in my opinion. I mean, like, facetiously the worst part of this industry, right? Like, you work on something or you hear about something for years and years and years and years, and you're like, when are they gonna announce it? When are they gonna announce it? When are they gonna announce it? But yeah, they finally announced my game, so I am significantly happier than previous to when they didn't announce it.
Yeah, was early on, was it kind of fun to have a secret, but then it just started to wear on
No,
you?
it was killing me. It was killing me the entire time. Literally the entire time. Because I was dying under the weight of this NDA. I was just like, I must maintain my professionalism. But literally every few weeks, I would like have the urge to just like run to the top of some mountain and scream. It's like, Mass Effect! Mass Effect! Mass Effect! Yeah.
So now you can tell the people who haven't read the title of this episode what your game is.
It's Mass Effect. It is a Mass Effect board game co-designed with Eric M. Lang, brought to life by Modifius Entertainment out of the UK, and BioWare, of course, the license holders of Mass Effect out of the US.
That is awesome. That's a huge team project too. How did you come to be involved? I've actually, because we Twitter know each other, I've known that you've been a Mass Effect fan for years and years and years because you tweet about it. So this seems natural to me, but is that actually how you got the gig?
Yes, it is, because through the amazing powers of the internet, Eric, who is been a game designer for decades, huge name in the game industry. Chances are, if you're a hobby nerd, then you will absolutely know who Eric is. You've played his games, Chaos in the Overworld, Zombicide, XCOM, a bunch of card games for Fantasy Flight Games. Ankh, recently he did Ankh. His most recent project, Life in Reterra, is a hobby. It's a hobby board game aimed at the mass market. Like he wants people to go to Toys R Us and buy Life in Reterra, and then have it be their first big hobby board game and get them absolutely hooked on the hobby, basically. So he, because he's such a giant name and is very famous and very good, got asked by Modifius to make the Mass Effect board game because they had the license. Apparently, this was something that they had been trying to make happen for years and years and years, and they finally got the license. They finally got everything worked out, and they called Eric and they're like, Eric, do you want to do the Mass Effect board game? And he was like, but I don't know anything about Mass Effect. He was about to say no. He was about to say like, oh, there, you should find somebody else who actually knows stuff about Mass Effect. And he was like, wait a minute, I do know somebody who knows something about Mass Effect. I should call Calvin. Well, DM Calvin. Yeah. And he did. And he was like, hey, Calvin, hey, Calvin, hey, Calvin, hey, Calvin. So do you want to work on this board game called Mass Effect? I believe I'll have to look through. I haven't gone back to look yet, but I think my response was something along the lines of short answer yes, long answer oh my god, hell yes, please no, I need it now, something like that. But yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, no, he because like you said, like he had seen me on Twitter talking about the series and how much I liked it and what it meant to me, and so um, yeah, that's why he invited me to work on the project. Should we talk about what Mass Effect is for those board game nerds who
Yes.
might not know what it is?
Yes, we should. Also, clearly tweeting about things you like makes dreams come true. So everyone, let's
No,
learn lessons.
no, definitely. I think like it's hard, it seems like it's shouting into the void sometimes, but like you have to understand that it's the network part of social network, right? Like it's you are talking to people, even if the people don't respond or don't see it, some people will, so eventually you're gonna hit something. um yeah, so Mass Effect is a video game series from all the way back in, I think it started in 2006, and it's a series of video games that was pioneering for several reasons. One, your choices matter. If you make a choice in the game, it carries forward not only through that game, but all of the sequels. So if you made a choice in Mass Effect 1, it would have repercussions in Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3. So by the time we got to the end of the trilogy, there was like vast web of like things that could have happened, characters that were alive, characters who were dead, choices that you made, and ripple effects stuff. Obviously not everything mattered, right? Like it didn't look at everything in your save file, but it looked at certain things, and that was enough to give the illusion of like, you have agency in this universe, and your choices will have impact on, you know, the fate of the galaxy, basically, or the fate of your favorite space blorbo. Um, and that's which brings me to the other reason that Mass Effect is so popular and enduring, so many years after its thing. The space blorbos, they are very charming. They are very people love them. Um, Literally, the first thing anyone asks, like when you talk about Mass Effect, it's like, okay, so who's your favorite character, or like which character did you romance? Anytime, nobody talks about the plot to Mass Effect. They always talk about the characters, and they always talk about the like the character moments. That's so that's broadly it. The gameplay is a third person shooter. It's like an over the shoulder camera. Your character has a gun. You have a squad. They also have guns, but they also have like cool abilities, like psychic abilities, and like you can throw um, fire bullets at your enemies, or you can like recharge your shields really fast. That's the basic gameplay, and also lots of dialogue choices, lots of ethical choices. You can like, do you save all the puppies, or do you rescue the orphanage from burning down, kind of thing. Yeah, very very simplified, but that's the general idea. Some of these choices can get quite um, heartbreaking, I would say. It's just like, do we? They love to precariously balance like the needs of the few and the needs of the many. So it's just a question of like, which option do you take? Which option do you think defines like what would your character do? Basically, you're playing one character whose name is Commander Shepard, and he or she or they can have, make choices that impact millions and millions of lives. And that's why Mass Effect is so loved, I think, because of that choices and because of the space blobbers, basically.
All right, so heart-wrenching choices and endearing characters. Excellent. So
It's those two things that we really wanted to bring into the board game as well. And those are the two main things. So like, how do we give the characters choices that are meaningful? I mean, within the scope of the story, right? We can't save the galaxy in the board game. The setting of the board game is one mission. So if you played the video game, you play a bunch of missions, right? Like, you go somewhere, you do something, you make a bunch of choices, and then we go back. The story continues from there. So the pitch that I made to Eric at BioWare when they asked us to do this game was, what if this board game is a lost mission, a mission that had to be left on the cutting room floor that never ended up being produced. You know,
So, is it going to be the potential to do a bunch of missions strung together, or just one? Truly,
uh,
just one.
no, the board game splits that mission into several smaller missions,
I
right?
got you.
Yeah. So in the board game, the campaign lasts 3 to 5 missions. Each mission being like one. It's meant to be like 1 45-minute session, basically. So the idea is that you set up Mass Effect, you play for 45 minutes, that's the end of one mission, and then you can continue to the next mission and see like the choices you made and how they affect the next mission and all that. You level up your characters, so as you progress through the missions, your characters get stronger, and you see like how your skills and your combos interact with the other members of the squad, and then um, eventually you reach the end of the campaign, which like I said, 5 missions, 45 minutes, about 3 hours, right? If I've done my math correctly. And then you're done. And then you can replay the campaign if you like, or you can just put it away forever. It's entirely your choice. That was another one of the things that we really wanted to do with Mass Effect, which was a lot of players of Mass Effect, the video game, love to replay the series, whether it's to see new things or just to make the same choices that they've already made before. It's surprisingly popular. There are people who play the game every year, few years or whatever, and they make exactly the same choices just because they enjoy the delivery of that story so much. Some people say like, okay, this time I'm gonna do a renegade run. A renegade is like pragmatic and like get things done, and a paragon run is like more idealistic and um, wanting to save everybody. It's coming from a place of like good-heartedness and basic paladin stuff. But the idea is that we wanted to do that with the board game as well. So we intentionally made the mission short. We intentionally made the campaign short for 2 reasons. One, so you could replay it in a reasonable manner. We didn't want to have one of those campaign games where you're like, everybody come over, they play for 4 hours, and they're like, great, that was mission 1. See you in 6 months, everybody, for mission 2. And there's 10 missions in this campaign, and you just, in the back of your head, you're like, wow, it would be nice to finish this one day in 2037, you know? Um, so that was one thing. I mean, I have campaign games too. I know exactly what it's like. So that was one thing that we wanted to have for this game, was a campaign that you could actually finish, a campaign that you might potentially want to replay. Because another reason that we gave players is that there's a score system. So if you want the best score, it is almost, this is actually one of the things that we're really proud of with the game, which is, if you don't care about the score and you just want to like get through to the end, or just like turn your brain off and just like, pew pew aliens, right? Like, um, the game should be almost impossible to lose. Not totally impossible. Of course, you can lose if you're really reckless, but if you're playing, relatively okay, you should be able to make it to the end of the campaign without much trouble. If you want the best score, if you want to do all the side quests, if you want to get the best quote unquote ending, really difficult, actually. Really, really hard. So it's like that. And the reason we're proud of that is because then without doing anything in terms of like changing the setup or changing the difficult, like, having like some games like, oh, difficult, if it's on medium difficulty, give yourself fewer health, right? Or like give yourself less money or whatever. Without doing any of that, we just made an entirely player choice based approach to the difficulty system, where players can choose to make the game as easy or as hard as they want and subject themselves to increasingly high levels of challenge. But again, totally optional, because we had data from BioWare that said something like 86 or 90% of players, when presented with a choice between a Paragon, like idealistic, and a Renegade, pragmatic option, 90% of players went with the blue choice, the Paragon choice. In our playtesting, 100% of players tried to do the blue choice. We were like, that means we should make the blue choice really hard, give better rewards, but it should be really hard. Because it's the same. It's like I said, right? Like, to give a very like simplified example, the red choice is to rescue everybody from the burning building. That's a pragmatic thing. The building is burning. You go and you rescue everybody. The idealistic choice is and save the research data and the puppy, right?
Ooh.
Which makes the moment you put that in front of a players, everybody's going to like, yeah, we're going to try and save the data and the puppy, you know.
Of course.
That's what we found, and so because of that, a lot of players are going to make the game harder for themselves, and the only person they'll have to blame is them. Yeah.
You're speaking my language, especially as a solo player. I feel like we put a lot on ourselves just as players. That's
Oh
awesome.
yeah.
So one thing I want to ask then, so that you mentioned something super interesting, which is
Mhm.
data. So I feel like in a lot of, I mean, I'm co-designing stuff with David. A lot of our data is just whatever small group of playtesters we can find
Mhm.
and extensive play ourselves. It sounds like you had access to a lot more. So what kinds of
No,
data
well,
were you
no.
able
I mean,
to look at? Like,
that's just a tweet that BioWare made with a pie chart that said 86 or whatever, right? Like, I didn't have access to their internal databases or whatever. It's just I just happen to know. In terms of like, okay, if you want to talk about data though, we talk about doing playtests. A lot of it is I was not doing quantifiable in the sense that like, oh, how many turns were the players taking to complete the game, or like, how
right.
many attacks on average does it take to defeat each monster, because Eric and I don't really work like that. Although you can make games that way, and it's probably a good thing to do sometimes. Both of us are very feel based. Like I would run a playtest, and I'm like, God, this is so slow. I just wonder this is probably because we increased the HP curve of all the enemies before the last test. And then we'd have to work on that. And then when I asked the playtesters questions, I'd ask them specifically like, did you think that the enemies were too hard to kill, or like took too long to kill, or like were starting to become boring and rote? So I'm asking for feel stuff, right? So here's a development story based on data. Well, kind of data. So I've told the story on Twitter before, but I don't think it'll be fun to tell on the podcast again. We were having a problem in playtesting where the players said they did not feel heroic enough. And we're like, okay, well, that's on us as the designers to fix that, right? We want you to feel heroic. It's a game about being in a squad and like high-fiving each other, and you blow up the bad guys and go like, yeah, we won, right? So we want the players to feel heroic. So we tried a bunch of stuff to make the players feel heroic and more heroic, and none of it was clicking. So we tried, for example, one of the things we tried to do was make enemies tougher, right? If the enemies get tougher, then it's more of a like a high point when you take them down. That didn't work. It didn't work because if we just gave the enemies more health, the game became boring as well as not feeling heroic, right? Because
Yeah.
yeah, and also then you'd have a big problem where if the enemies had too much health, the characters who are good at doing damage would be getting all the kills, and the characters who are like more like support-based characters were not doing anything. They would basically go, okay, the enemy has 8 health, bam, I deal 1 damage with my pistol. Okay, and it became really boring. And when enemies had mountains of HP, players tended to avoid them and just like go around them. And it's like, well, that's not really the feeling that we want, right? We're making a squad tactics game. We want them to engage with the enemies. So increasing enemy health didn't work. Making the enemies more dangerous also didn't work, because the way that we do it in our game to activate the enemies is you draw cards from an event deck. And so the event deck says all the blue enemies activate, all the red enemies activate, all the green enemies activate, like that. And when we tried to make the enemies spikier, it became uncontrollable. The players would be like, we're doing great, we're doing great, we're doing great, we're doing great. They'd pull 2 bad event cards in a row and they wipe, right? And then they were frustrated, like, well, what the heck just happened out of nowhere, right? We tried increasing player health to compensate for the spikiness, but then players then had no challenge because they would just run past all the enemies, tank it with all their health. So we had a bunch of data saying that this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. And that was the the quantifiable data, and the qualitative data that players were giving us specific feedback about all that. So how did we end up fixing the problem? We cut all player damage in half. So originally, players were doing like their basic attack was like, oh, you do 2 damage on a hit and like 4 damage on a crit, right? So we cut it in half. And at first, it sounds like, how does cutting the damage in half make players feel more heroic? How does that work, right? And it's because if you cut player damage in half, and of course, enemy HP to compensate, even if you cut all the numbers in the game in half. This was advice that Sid Meier gave. Sid Meier was the designer of Civilization. Before he shipped the first Civilization, like all the way back in the early 90s, the map was way too big. It was taking way too long for the game to go anywhere, and he didn't have time before the game shipped to test. Reduce the map by 15%, reduce the map by 30%. He cut it in half. It's like, it works amazing. Shipped it, because if you make small changes, it's harder to see the effects. If you make big changes, it becomes very obvious where your pain points actually are. When we cut all damage and all HP in half, so instead of doing 2 to 4 on a crit, they did 1 to 2 on a crit, maybe 3 on a crit. So if you can only deal 3 damage on a crit, suddenly a 4 HP enemy is incredibly dangerous, right? And when you actually defeat it, you feel badass. Or you crit it for 3, you're like, I need 1 damage. Who's got 1 damage? And you're looking around the table, and they go, I do. And then, bam, we're like, yes, high fives all around. They felt amazing, right? And the reason that worked for us, I think, is because of granularity. When you're working with small numbers, below 10, and in board games, we tend to work with numbers below 10 because we're not video games. We can't. That enemy has 234 hit points. Good luck with your cardboard tokens, So for us as cardboard designers, we are working generally with single digit or sometimes double digit numbers maximum, right? The early teens. And if you're working with numbers like that, you don't have a lot of control granularity, because 2 damage is twice as much as 1 damage. The +1 is a double. If you deal 50 damage and I give you +1, you're like, who cares? 51 versus 50. If I give you +1 and you were dealing 1, that's double. I've doubled your output, right? So that was why we had that. That was partly why we had that problem. Like, we didn't have enough control over the granularity of our numbers when enemies had 8 HP and characters can deal 4. And then like, oh, so I need 2 crits to kill it, 8, but it's so much, it's so hard to get 2 crits, I'll just go around it, right? I'll just ignore the enemy and leave it alive. But if it has 4 and you can crit for 3, you're like, oh, it's so close, I'm so close, right? And if you get a level up that actually lets you do 4 damage or 5 damage, and suddenly an enemy that was previously like a giant wall of HP, if you do 1 damage and 3 on a crit, and there's an enemy with 7 health, you're like, oh, Jesus Christ, right? But if one of your characters comes in and goes, I can do 7 damage, hang on, and there is high fives all around the table, right? So that was it. That was one of the great data moments in Mass Effect. So thank you for asking me that question and letting me tell that story.
That's a good story, and it also makes me think, so it sounds like the combat is snappy and fun, which is exactly what one would want, but how do you balance that with putting enough narrative in the game to make it feel like Mass Effect? I'm like a story player, I'm like 100%, I want dialogue choices,
Yeah.
and, I don't know if you could put romance into a single mission, maybe you could tell us about that too. But, like, I'm like a play Baldur's Gate like a dating sim sort of person. So how do you
Mass
weave
Effect is a
narrative
dating sim,
in?
like I said at the start of the podcast, right? It basically is a dating sim the way people play it. How do we put narrative in? So narrative in a board game is a function of component space. A lot of the time, it is a function of component space. So originally, we thought we weren't going to have a separate book for, flavor text, because we thought we wanted to have all the flavor text directly on the maps and stuff. So, little text boxes, put all the flavor text in there. So that, okay, so each box is going to give me 50 to 75 words maximum. So we wrote the flavor text with that in mind. But as development progressed, two things happened. One, we figured out we didn't have as much space on the book as we thought we did. And it was getting very cluttered. Like by the time it was getting into graphic design, they're like, we want to put so much stuff on this page, right? Board game design is a lot about component design and product design. You're like, how many millimeters is this token? Like, how many millimeters is this hex? Because that's how many millimeters the hex is how big the mini is going to be, how big the book is going to be, is how big the box is going to be, which is how many palettes can we actually so it's working backwards a lot of the time. So how many millimeters we have, what's our font size, what's our font, lots of things like that, which is sort of invisible when you play board games from the other side. But when you actually have to design a board game, Eric took the lead on a lot of this because he's got a lot of experience. But he would be doing things like, okay, what's our bleed here? Like how many are we doing? It's like, what's our box size? And from there, he can immediately, because he's so experienced, he works backwards and go, okay, so because this is our box size, our minis are this big, the map is going to be 9x9, right? We would like it to be bigger to make the missions more complex, but also if they're too big, that's more play testing for us for every mission. So we ended up on 81 hexes, 9x9. And what also happened is we ended up having more room in the budget to print a second book. So that book is going to have most, if not all, of the story text in it. Still not a lot of story text, about 200 words-ish, because I'm very conscious of the fact that this is something that you have to read out to other people. And if, you're playing a board game with 3 other people, you don't necessarily want to be sitting there reading for minutes upon minutes of time. But how did we integrate narrative? That was the original question. Basically, when you make a choice in the game, there'll be a narrative payoff. We wanted to use it to reward the player for making a choice, any choice. Even if you succeed, even if you fail, we'll still give you some narrative to pay it off. We also wanted the narrative to contain hints for the players, so that because there's a certain type of gamer who will skip absolutely every little bit of flavor text because it doesn't matter to them. I don't think they'll be playing Mass Effect because Mass Effect is for people who want the story, but there is a certain type of person who skips all the flavor text, and Eric and I don't like that person and want to punish them by putting hints in the flavor text. So if you don't read the flavor text, you're missing some of the context you may need to get the best outcomes or whatever. Yeah. Also, I was so grateful and so happy that they let me play in the sandbox of Mass Effect and let me write actual dialogue for these characters that I've known and loved for so long, and that they liked it. Like I submitted it, and we're like, oh, please, please like it, and they like it. Like, yes, they like it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, it's really fun. I'm really excited about playing a game that you've co-designed because I basically know you as a writer. So how how did your experience writing help with this? And then what things did you have to kind of change or adjust to make it fit a new mode of communication?
What do you mean by a new mode of communication? Like board games?
So, like communicating through a game as opposed to through a more extensive text.
I guess Twitter helped because you only have 280. Honestly, one of the things that I got to do in my career as a writer that has been really, really helpful is I've written in probably every area of writing there is: radio, theater, TV, commercial, news, like listicles, lifestyle, except maybe like technical writing, like manuals. But that's not true. I've done rule books, right? Like I've done rule books, I've done board games, I've done video games a little bit. So like exposure to all that kind of thing really makes you understand that the medium is the message. You have to be able to write to fit that, right? So if I have 200 words or even 75 words to convey a scene for this, for example, for Mass Effect, I have to know what's important, and I have to like winnow it down to like what actually matters. Economy of words, choice of words, um, going back and watching clips from the video games, like how does this character talk? What's their word choice like? Right? Like what how do they structure their sentences? What's their cadence? You know, um, what are the alien language words that they use that I've forgotten because it was how many years ago, and use that all to construct things that fit the goal that I want to have. For example, my goal for this dialogue box is we've saved all the puppies from the burning research center. The team gets to high five each other, right? And then how do I do that in a way that works for the characters, that um, that feels triumphant and rewarding for the players to read, um, and hopefully it'll be funny and full of like the flavor of the characters that I choose to be in that scene, right? We have 5 characters in the game, which is Commander Shepard, Rex, who's like a big bruiser guy, thinks with his gun. Tali, who's like an engineer character, she's a bit more pragmatic. Um, Liara, who's like a scientist, archaeologist with psychic powers, she's an idealist. And Garrus, who's uh, like a sniper, ex-military character. He's very pragmatic. But they all have their own like personality quirks and all that. And writing them was easy in a way because they're so iconic. Their voices have lived in my head for so long. But it's also difficult because like it's just because I think the word count and also knowing what to say, I think, deciding what to say, and making it so that it's not repetitive, because we've got lots of these little text boxes all through the game, so it's not the same thing every time. Was challenging, but it was a lot of fun to get it done in the end. And you asked about like the challenges working with BioWare. Is that right?
Yeah, I was very curious. So because and you mentioned you're so glad they liked your dialogue, and I'm really glad they liked your dialogue. That's so cool. But are there things that are there places that you weren't allowed to go? Were there limitations that you were working in because you were working with somebody else's
Well,
IP?
the limitations specifically were like, well, don't break canon, right? The characters should sound like the characters, which we're fine with. They did make several requests, which I think were very reasonable, but they weren't to do with my writing per se. It was more like, can we set this in a different location, for example? Not actually what happened. I'm just saying an example. Like, so this location that you've chosen, can we change it to a different kind of location instead for reason? Maybe it was like a reason like, oh, maybe this location doesn't actually exist within the fiction, for example. Again, not a real example, I'm making it up. But that's one potential like kind of thing. Second reason is things like, oh, we've already had a location like this earlier in the game, could we have some variety? That's another one. A third one might be, they might go like, oh, we would actually like you to include this, can we have this kind of thing? Again, broad strokes, not exactly what happened, but you get the general idea. There was only really
Yeah.
one major thing which they asked changed, and the reason that they gave was like it fits it doesn't fit the time frame of the game. And I was like, I read it and I was disappointed by the choice because it was a feature that I worked really hard on and I really wanted to put it into the board game. But when I heard their reasoning for it, I was like, yeah, I kind of get it actually. And I wasn't even like, I mean, obviously I was disappointed, but I didn't think they were doing it to like protect their IP or like be mean to us or whatever. The reasoning that they gave, which is like, it doesn't really fit the time frame that we've got in our board game. They're like, I was like, oh, fine, like they're right. I mean, I don't like it because I worked really hard on it, and now we have to cut the feature. But they were right, and I do respect them for like sticking to their vision, I guess. And who knows? Maybe we'll put that feature into a future game. It would be nice. Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
So The other question that I had is, so it sounds like your teamwork with BioWare was actually pretty positive. Um,
Yeah. To
and
be
then,
clear, though, it wasn't. I never really sat in the meetings with them. It was I submit the work to Modifius. Modifius goes to the meetings with BioWare. BioWare comes back with stuff, and Modifius says, "Hey, Calvin, this is what BioWare said." Yeah, but yeah.
I mean, fair enough. But this is a team thing with lots of moving parts. But I'm assuming that the person you worked closely with throughout the process was Eric Lang.
Yeah.
So how how did y'all manage to work across multiple time zones and like have a shared vision and really make this design relationship work?
Well, we mostly did what you and I are doing right now, which is like, video chats and talking about stuff. And he'll be like, have his notebook in front of him and doing sketches and like, um, have conversations, like jump into Tabletop Simulator together to futz around with the prototype. To answer all of those questions is going to be pretty boring, unfortunately, because the answer is we're very similar. The two of us are very similar just in like our tastes and like the way we think about things. I've always been I always think about board games. I had always thought about board games as like physical things. I think there's a lot of game designers that think of games as like an intangible set of rules, right? But then those rules have to translate to physical things. Like, for example, if I have a cardboard token in my game, I can tell the players, as part of the rules, stand the token on the edge. I can say it in the rules, but players are gonna hate it. They're gonna hate having to like fiddle with the little like how do we make it stand on the So being aware that you're working with physical components in real space really is something that's a core philosophy for the two of us, right? Like we cut features because they were annoying to implement in real life. It's things like, oh, what if we did this? Oh, that's too many cards, or like, oh, that's too many dice, or like, it's that thing. There's a very famous argument. It's like, can you shuffle a deck that has one card in it?
Oh God.
I mean, the answer.
Is
Okay,
a hot dog a sandwich?
there's two schools of thought there. From the intangible school of thought, yes, of course you can, right? To shuffle is to randomize. You just randomize the card, and it doesn't really matter, right? But from a physical perspective, you can't shuffle it because there's only one card. To shuffle is to mix the cards, right? Even shuffling two cards is difficult and annoying, right? Because you're going to be able to know which card is which, right? So it's things. There's just an illustrative point, but Eric and I are always thinking about the physicality of things, right? Like if we have a token, okay, the token has a reverse. What can we do with the reverse, right? Why not? Why a token? Why not standees? Because standees don't have a facing. Tokens do have a facing. They either face up or face down. Standees can be like root, depending on where you're sitting on the table. Everyone's looking at the standee in a different way, so you can't. It only has one side effectively, right? When there's a token, you have two sides. Why a mini? Because we want the character to appear cinematic and like it's fun. It'll be, and also from a product design standpoint, we'll probably sell a lot more copies if we have minis in it, especially minis of people's favorite characters, right? I don't know how the box design is going, but at one point there was talk about having a little plastic window on the front of the box that showed off the minis. And I thought that was a great idea, and I hope we are still doing that, but I don't know if we are, because having to do a window like that, you're talking about like you have to do a cutout, you have to have plastic, there's costs involved, lots and lots of things that you can't just do the thing, because there's so many different factors involved with whether you can or cannot do the thing. And even whether we have minis or not, it's like, can we get the sculpts? Can we do sculpts? How many minis can we have? We actually had. Have you played Mass Effect?
Very long ago, but yes.
There's a very popular character in Mass Effect named Mordin. He's a scientist. He's famous for singing songs. I am the very model of a scientist, hilarious. He was supposed to be in this game, but we had to cut him because 6 minis is 1 mold and 7 minis is 2 molds. And the molds cost tens and tens of thousands of dollars. it was not the only reason, but it was a primary reason, right? Like it was also like, oh, if he's in the game, you have to playtest another character, and how many more combinations of characters, right? Like he has to work with all of the others. So hopefully we do him in a future box. But yeah, we had to cut Morden. He was originally on the slate. Everybody loved the idea, but then they were like, oh, we have 7 minis is doubling the cost of 7 instead of 6. So it's things like this, right? It's like you don't even think about it when you're playing the game, but when you like go behind the curtain, you talk about like, 53 cards may as well cost as much as 54 cards. It's like as 104 cards, right? Because if a standard deck is 52, that's the cost to print one sheet. If you add one card to make it 53, you might as well go to 104. You know what I mean? Because that's 2 sheets. Yeah.
I never thought about it that much, honestly, and now I'm, like, thinking about it. Night Witches is so small.
Yeah.
It's, we'll just make Kevin deal with it, but
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 even
then
even things like the cardboard tokens, right? Like eventually you're going to have to put all of those tokens on a punch board. So how many of them? How many punch boards? Each punch board shape needs a new tool, and those tools are thousands and thousands of dollars. I'm sure you've seen some games where you're like, you open the game, you take out all the punch board, and all of the punch board is identical. Like the printing is different, obviously, but the holes are all in the same place. It's cheaper that way. If you have unique shapes and unique holes, you need custom tools for each one, aka the Fantasy Flight approach.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It is wild.
So it sounds like there's so much to think about in terms of, like, I guess, balancing between needing the game to be a product and then also the game is a work of art.
Yeah.
But also Yeah, no, continue.
No, I want to hear the rest of the thought.
Oh, I wanted to know, so, we talked about bringing narrative into the game.
Yeah.
How much narrative weight can you rest on components when you can't necessarily use too many words?
A lot,
And
actually.
did that
A lot. Because I think all narrative weight is down to the components. I'll give you an example, right? Let's play a very simple game. Let's find out if your character dies in the game. And there's 2 ways of doing it. The one way is you roll a dice. If you roll a 6, you're dead, for example, right? The emotion of rolling the dice is very, very different than turn the book to page 75. If page 75 says you die, you die. It's a completely different emotional feeling. Completely different to draw a card from the deck. If the card says you die, you die. All right, completely different to the card that you've had since the beginning of the game has a reverse side. Flip the card over to see if you die. Right? These are even though the same thing happens, the emotion of it is completely different. It's completely different. Right? How long are you going to be holding that dice in your hands? Like, come on, not a 6, right?
Very if you're me.
Yeah, exactly. The narrative weight and this is just a stupid example I made up off the top of my head. Right? And it's just a silly example I just made up off the top of my head. It's just like, does your character die? Well, it's like there's no heft here. There's no history here. But suddenly the emotion comes in anyway, right? So the answer is everything. So even things like, is the dice like a regular d6 or custom? Instead of a 6, is it a skull? It's a different thing, right? And again, there's a cost associated with that. We have to pay for custom molds. Can we get ink printing to make sure the skull is all nice and dark and black or whatever, right? So everything is push and pull. Obviously, the primary thing changes depending on what you're talking about. Like, one of the things that we stated right at the start of the creation of the game was we knew the price point approximately that we wanted to hit. So that put a very strong ceiling on things like box size. It put a very strong ceiling on things like the number of components that we're allowed to have. It put a very strong ceiling on things like, how long the game could be, right? Because physically it won't fit in the box size that we have already chosen. So it sounds weird, but actually it helps a lot because it drives the focus of your game. Okay, because we know that the enemies are going to be tokens, to reuse an example I said from earlier, we know that enemies can have a reverse side. Let's use that reverse side to put something there. Like what happens when we tell the player, okay, flip the enemy token over. What does that mean exactly? Right? There's a meaning there. And that was decided because we decided from the start enemies are not going to be minis. We can't afford it. It's way too expensive. Because if the enemies are minis, we can't tell the player to flip them over. It doesn't work. And it's things like, you know, how many dice molds are we making? But also sometimes you're like, okay, if we needed an extra type of dice, like if we really needed to put another type of dice in there, another custom one, I'm sure we could have found a way to make it work somehow, because the game will be much worse if we don't have this third type or fourth type of custom dice. I'm sure we would have found room in the budget somewhere, right? So it's push and pull. It's also like, why do you? It makes you ask questions like, you know, obviously it would have been nice if all of the enemies were minis. It would be nice, but it would have removed our ability to say flip the enemy token over. So it actually it changes the game design. When we do things like the event deck, right, where we said, like, you know, we draw cards to see the event deck. That's different than roll the die and see what happens and correspond to the event table. Because if a deck of cards has memory, if I draw card 10 is not in the deck anymore, and the players know that. It's like, okay, so they remember. So part of the strategy of the game is, okay, so we've drawn all of the cards that say green enemies attack. That means the green enemies aren't going to attack anymore, right? Unless we hit the shuffle card, for example, right? Unless we hit the card that says shuffle all the event cards back into the deck. You're like, okay, and now the green enemies are a threat again. So yeah, it's again like designing the rules of the game to work around the physical components of the game that you have to give to the players. Because you can tell the players, shuffle the event deck every time you draw from it, but that's annoying, right? It's annoying, and it actually makes the game worse because they can't plan and they can't predict, right? Whereas if you draw cards from the deck, you're emptying the deck steadily. The deck has memory, so the players can look through and say, okay, right, so green enemies are less threatening. We haven't drawn any of the red enemy cards yet, so we should probably either focus on those or stay away from them, right? So it gives them some form of strategy if they pay attention, if they know to count cards and like look at things like that. You know, there's layers there. They also, the other thing about to go in the opposite direction, dice are unpredictable, chaotic, random, and nonsense, right? And that's great. Eric loves dice because you throw them, you don't know what's going to happen. Obviously, you hope for an outcome, and obviously, we want you to have fun, right? We're not designing these dice to hate you. We're not trying to make we're trying to make the dice flexible. Dice in this game are how you do actions. So let's say like you roll the dice. Okay, I got a bunch of move actions, some shoot actions, and a special action, right? That's on the dice. So then you go, okay, so I want this one, and this one. And then Liz, it's your turn. There's the rest of the dice are for you, but the pool is smaller now because I took those dice to use on my turn. So good luck. Yeah. And then we designed. We did a lot of design on like how to make that the size of that pool. You know, how many dice per player. What are the actions that we put on the dice? How do the actions correspond to various things? One of the things that Eric is a big fan of is exploding dice. I don't know if you know what that is. So basically,
Yeah, like where you get a certain result and then you get to roll it again and then potentially again.
yeah, and again and again and again until yeah. So you just in theory roll a 6 like 50 times, right? And you just keeps happening and happening and happening and happening and happening, and you just keep getting. And I can see why he loves it, because it injects like this beautiful like frisson of like, oh, it could keep happening, right? And the players are excited because in our game, when the dice explodes, it's good for you. You're getting bonuses every time. So the players are like, oh, come on, come on. Like, let's get there. Yeah. So totally different emotional feeling, totally different narrative feeling than the event deck, and in a way that we like. So Uh, I know it took a while to answer the original question, but yeah, the answer is everything. The answer is everything. Also, I'm not sure if this is in the final game or not because I don't know how the graphic design ended up. But one of the things that we wanted to have, definitely that was in the original pitch. I'm not sure if it's going to end up in the final game. Is we wanted to hide all of the flavor text behind those. You know those things where you can't read the text until you put the red piece of plastic over it.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Like a cereal box prize.
Yes, exactly. That was how we wanted all of the flavor text. So it will be right there on the page. You're like, if you rescue the puppies, read this, and then you slide the red plastic over it, and now you can read it.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in the final game now, but because we switched this to the second book thing, maybe the
Right.
second book is all printed in that hidden text. I don't know. But yeah, that's an emotional thing, right? Because one of the things that the reason we did that is because it solves that thing of we tell the players, okay, do you want to rescue all the puppies? If you rescue all the puppies, read this. Players will instantly start reading it, right? So you have to elide it in some way. You have to occlude it, right? So putting it so they have to slide the little red piece of plastic or whatever over it means that to read it is an actual choice rather than just accidentally starting. It's like the puppies all flock to us. Oh, I want the puppies now. Yeah.
Oh. That's awesome. Yeah, I like a little bit of air of mystery, especially because, especially if you're a speed reader, like you take one glance and you've already spoiled it for yourself
Yeah,
on the
exactly.
text.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I'm good at lying to myself as a solo gamer, but it
Yeah,
would
but
be really nice, actually.
it's different, right? So that's why we wanted to have the decoder lens, so that you don't spoil yourself unless you can actually read the hidden text, which some people apparently can. But yeah, that was the idea behind it. So that was like again, components informing narrative design, right? Narrative design informing components, and that circular cyclical nature of it is something that is really fascinating to me as a game designer. Like the physical act of drawing a card, the physical act of throwing a die, like the physical act of like arranging the tokens on the board. Like these are all things that we considered. Like we were like, do we have too many tokens? Is setup taking too long? Like these are things that we have to think about. Like the number of loot tokens in the game was something that we went back and forth over many, many, many times because we wanted to get not just the ratio of loot just right, but we didn't want it to be annoying to randomize the loot tokens.
Right.
Yeah, so it's tiny, 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 minute details like this that actually make a really big difference because when you physically interact with the board game, everything you do, every token you touch, like every time you open the rulebook, every time you pull the box open, every time you like shuffle the cards, every time you like shuffle the tokens or like try to take the tokens out of the box, that is all part of the gaming experience. And Eric and I have played lots of games where the UX, the user experience of like the act of taking the components out of the box is so onerous. It's like, okay, find tile 13A, 37B, and 42C. 15 minutes later, we finally got the map set up. Yeah. So the thing is that is part of playing the game, even though the designer or obviously they have good intentions when they make this. You can have lots of variety with the tiles. The tiles can be double-sided, lots of different art. You can have like multiple different map layouts, but like you're like, okay, we have to hunt for these 6 tiles before we can even start playing the game. And how did you store them? Can they fit back in the box?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So, this is your first game design, right?
This is my first game design that's going to get published. Yes.
It's going to get published. Okay. So do you find then that like this experience has changed your sensibilities about games or just kind of sharpened what you already knew before? I feel like you've got a lot of interesting kind of behind the scenes peeks into production and stuff this time around.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just like learning from Eric. Eric being such a thing. Because the more experience you have, right? Like I would propose a solution to something like a design problem, and he would say, "No, try that before, and like in another game that doesn't really work." And he would explain why. I'd be like, "Okay, great." So we shortcut it because if it was just me, I would have prototyped it, right, and like tried it out. And instead, he gets in 30 seconds, he gets to tell me, "No, that won't work. I think, and why." And he'll explain why, and I'll say, yeah, okay, actually, because he leads me down that path, right? Like, so that logically I can understand. Oh, A because of A, B because of B, C because of C, D. Okay, I see why it won't work now. Okay, got it. So he's not dictating it to me. We're collaborating, but he shortcuts it because he's been down that path. He's tried that before, so he knows the main thing. Like one of the things that you were saying, like, does this sort of sharpen me or whatever? Like, one of the things I was kind of not sure about when I started gaming is that I don't think there's a good line of sight system ever. And now that I've made this game, I'm like, no, there is no good line of sight system ever. There's only a line of sight system that works for the exact game that you're making, and it will never work in any other game ever again. Yeah.
What? There's not little like rulers in the Mass Effect box to help it? No kidding.
God, please, like. If I ship a game with little line of sight rulers, just kill me. It's never ever gonna happen. It's never ever happen. If any of my rule books it says get a measuring tape, I'm just like, no, absolutely not. Yeah. So, but it's hard, right? It's hard to make line of sight systems that are like intuitive, that encompass all the use cases, that are easy to remember. Like we have things that are like that work well for the game, but like playtesters just don't remember. They always forget. Give you an example. Playtesters always forgot to. One of the things you can do, like you roll the dice, right? One of the things you can do is you can pass one of the dice to the next player. So let's say it's my turn. I roll the dice, and I look at you and I go, "Hey, Liz, your character needs an attack, right? Because there's an enemy right in front of her face." You're like, "Yeah. Remember to pass me that attack." I'm like, "Okay." So I do my thing, and then I push all the dice towards you. It's like, "Oh no, I forgot to save the attack." No. So we have to like grab the dice and like rotate until the attack is done. Everyone forgot, including us when we played it. How do we fix it? We changed it. We changed the rule to, instead of the player whose turn it is can save one dice for the next player, the player whose next turn it is can take one dice from the previous player.
Oh, that's smart. That's such a like efficient way to fix that.
In terms of like mechanisms, it's identical, but instantly everyone remembered, because as part of my turn, I get to take one of the dice that you roll and fix it, right? Instead of, because and I think we think the reason people are always forgetting is because, okay, I've taken my dice, I've done my action, that's the end of my turn. The brain just goes, right, and then it forgets the last step. By making it the first step of the next player's turn, even though nothing has changed rules wise, everybody remembers. It's just human psychology, right?
Yeah, just it's very much like we were talking before, right? Like, how does your character die? What's the mechanism that you choose? The character can die in a number of ways, but the mechanism that you choose to make it happen has different resonances.
It's totally different. It's the same thing. It's like rules wise identical, feelings wise completely different. The example I always like to give is Agricola. Have you played Agricola?
Oh yeah, probably too much.
Okay,
I burned out on it.
Agricola is a game about farming, right? So at the end of the game, when you go out to count score, you take penalties for each thing you don't have. Oh, you don't have at least 2 vegetables, minus 3 points. Or like, oh, you didn't have more than 2 sheep, minus 3 points or whatever. Like from a mathematical perspective, this is identical to, oh, if the player has 2 sheep, gain 3 points. If the player has 2 vegetables, gain 3 points. Mathematically identical, emotionally completely different. Completely different. Because Agricola is a game about subsistence farming, the negative is actually like adds to the game, right? It feels awful, but so does subsistence farming. In the 1700s or whenever the game is set. So if
What? I
you
thought Agricola was an idyllic, wonderful game about a perfect no, I'm kidding.
it is pain the game, starvation, ruin, yeah. So, but that's it, right? Like two things which are mathematically identical have completely opposite um things, and this is a lot of like game design is also a lot about human psychology and also a lot about like understanding why people like certain things and why people don't like certain things and things that Jeff Engelstein talks about this a lot on his podcast, Game Tech, and he talks about the psychology of gaming. Things like loss aversion, which is like people vastly prefer to gain something than to have lost something. It's like I think and something like the human brain needs 5 good incidents to like cancel out the emotional hit of one bad incident. You know, even things
Yes,
like
we remember pain.
even things like we can only remember about 5 things at once. You know, um, yeah, we can only like in our memory about 5 things at once, and the more you overload that, like the further. It, Eric always talks about complexity budget. Like the game has complexity, definitely, right? Otherwise, it's not a game. It's just where do we want to spend the complexity? For us, we don't want to spend it on like learning the rules. We want the rules to be super simple. We don't want to spend it on like, oh, where does this token go? We want that to be super simple. Where we wanted our complexity budget to be spent was, oh god, there's 6 enemies. There's 4 of us. There's going to be more enemies at the end of the round. What the hell do we do? That's where we wanted our players to spend their time thinking, right? But the actual like process of playing their turn should be dead simple. Dead simple. It's just like that's my turn done, right? But the what they choose to do on their turn, that's the hard part. So that's where we chose to spend our complexity budget. And I think just having the term complexity budget in my vocabulary, really like informs how I think about a lot of stuff. Basically, yeah. It has made me a better designer, obviously, because working with Eric, he's so experienced and he's very generous. He's always making sure that I understand things, and he's always like talking about stuff and learning and and teaching me stuff. So, um, my hope is I'll be doing Mass Effect boxes for a very long time. That's the hope. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Actually, that leads into my kind of last serious question for you before we just goof around a bit, which is, do you feel that you're going to do a lot more board game design in the future? And is that a way that you want to continue to express yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Because like I've got a couple of games going on right now with several co-designers. One is with the aforementioned Jeff Engelstein. One is with Pierre Sylvester, who designed The King is Dead and The Lost Expedition. And we're the one that I'm working on with Jeff is kind of like it's a tactics game, but the idea is that it's cute animals. It's cute. Instead of a squad of soldiers, it's a squad of cute animals. They're teaming together to like get the evil robots out of their jungle, like out, pick them out, blast them with paintballs or whatever, throw acorns at them. That's the idea behind the game at the moment. The one I'm doing with Pierre is a little bit more serious. It's a game about like rebellion and capitalistic oppression. So one player is the corporation. The corporation has targets to meet. If it doesn't meet the targets, then there's a vote of no confidence by the shareholders, and the corporation loses. So in order to meet the targets, it has to exploit the other players who are the workers, and force them to. And the workers are incentivized to participate in this by the fact that all of their basic needs, oxygen, food, etc., are provided solely by the corporation. This has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on reality. It's just a fun science fiction game. Um, the the idea is that we're trying to make a game where the corporation can't be too brutal because it's bad for business, but but also it knows that the workers are trying to uprise against it and end its reign of terror. Uh, but also at the same time, if you run out of workers, you can't meet the quarterly profit report, right? So yeah, that's what we're exploring at the moment.
That doesn't sound realistic at all. Um,
Mm.
That all sounds fantastic. So I'm looking forward to what you'll make. But what have you been playing recently that brings you joy?
Gloomhaven. Been playing the Gloomhaven is my favorite combat system in all of board games. It's so simple, two cards, top of one, bottom of the other one, but it's got so much depth and so much like that juicy, meaty puzzle of like, ooh, if I do this before that, but no, but if I do that before this, ooh, but if I do that, like yeah, you're a solo gamer, you know what I'm talking about. So Gloomhaven is great. I recently play tested their most recent release, Buttons and Bugs. Buttons and Bugs is a solo game that you can buy now. Buttons and Bugs is a shrunken Gloomhaven, basically. It's Gloomhaven in something like vaguely the size of a toothpaste box, basically. I think I'm right. Bad comparison, but yeah, it's shrunken Gloomhaven, right? It's Gloomhaven for one player. It's got small minis, like a tiny one dice, a bunch of little cards, and I played the heck out of it while we were playtesting, and I was having so much fun, like solving this delicious puzzle that Nikki Valens put together. Nikki is a great friend of mine. They're an amazing game designer. They did Quirky Circuits, which is an incredible co-op game. I don't know if you've played that.
I'm not. No.
Okay.
It looks super cute, but I have not.
So Quirky Circuits is one of my favorite game designs of all time because it's basically a very simple programming game where you play cute robots. So, for example, you play a cat on top of a Roomba. And the Roomba's job is to go around the map and vacuum up all the dirt and return to its home base and recharge, right? And if you and I are playing, for example, so we lay the cards out, it's like, okay, forward, turn left, turn right, turn left, forward, backwards, rotate, right? Sounds very easy, very simple, except we're not allowed to talk. So I look at you, and you look at me, and I take a card from my hand, you take a card from your hand, and we stare at each other, and we're like, okay, I'm going to put mine first. I put my card down. And you're like, that's a straight, right?
No.
But we're not allowed to talk. So you don't know that it's a straight. You have to guess that it's a straight. So because you think it's a straight, all right, I'll put the turn left. And you put the turn left. And then at the end of the turn, when we've played 10 cards, then the Roomba goes, you bump into a table, the lamp falls over and because you thought I played a straight, but it was actually a turn left. But when you can actually get it to all line up and you play a perfect 12 card series and the robot goes exactly where everybody thinks that it's supposed to go, it's like magic.
That's wonderful.
It's total
Honestly, that I should try that now. Yes.
Yeah.
I should find a friend to do this with. We, solo gamers don't have friends, but no, I'm kidding.
You're my friend. You're my friend. Also,
we could play online.
Also, yeah, we should. They also designed one that, remember that I said flip the card that you've had this whole time? That was something they did in Eldritch Horror and was also in their game Arkham Horror 3rd Edition. So what the card is called, the thing is you make a demonic pact, right? It's like, okay, and to gain great power, one day the pact might come due. If you roll a 1, flip this card. And every time,
good.
Yeah, every so often you got to roll. Did you roll a 1? Oh, you didn't roll a 1. Okay, you don't have to flip the card yet. Oh, you rolled. Did you roll a 1? You don't roll a 1. You don't have to flip the card yet. Oh no, I rolled a 1. Oh no, I rolled a 1. Oh, I don't want to flip this card. Yeah. So it would have things like you can cast a spell to rid the world of horrible eldritch horrors. Okay, you've cast a spell. Now flip this card. What is the cost? Right?
There's always a cost if there's demons involved.
And this was one of the things when I saw this and encountered this mechanic for the first time, I was like, this is one of the smartest things I've ever seen board games do. That then flip this card mechanic. Wait. Okay, now you get to see what horrible circumstance befalls you, right? And you don't know because there's and even if you play the game a bunch, you're like, okay, but all right, I know what happens. I know what happened the last time I took a dark pact. but there's 6 different dot pack cards. You get the same one, you know?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. Genius piece of game design. Genius. So wonderful. So yeah, their newest game, Buttons and Bugs, is available now. Quirky Circuits is amazing. Also should still be available. Really cute little co-op game, great for kids as well. Because when you play with kids, apparently, I haven't played this version, but when you play with kids, you just play the cards face up, so the kids can just like have a little fun little action programming game, right? And
Right.
they're still following the logic. But for adults who are like, okay, you put a reverse, right? You definitely put a reverse, right?
Oh, we know how that usually turns out.
But sometimes it turns
uh,
out great, and it's like a magic trick, you know? So,
yeah,
yeah.
reaching that full mind meld with another person is always like a really
With
it takes
four
work,
people,
but then it's amazing.
sometimes this is just like, oh, sort of great, like 12 card streak, perfect. Sometimes, like, one of my favorite moments in Quirky is when, like, after looking at each other for a while, I place one card, and then the next player, like the next 2 players, like 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, okay, done, and we turn them all over, and they're all perfect. Yeah.
That is amazing. All right, you've sold me on this actually, even though I normally do not allow non-solo things into the house.
Quirky is a great game. Quirky is a great game.
And if people want to follow your work, where do you like to be found online?
I'm Ithala, Ithayla, on most places, but mostly active on Twitter, because that's where a lot of my friends are.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Excellent. Calvin, I want to thank you so much for coming on for this interview and for giving us the time. This
It
was a
was
delightful
this was a
conversation.
great conversation. I'm so glad you invited me to do this. I'm really happy we did this.
I'm really looking forward to Mass Effect as well.
God, so am
So
I. I've been working on this since like the end of 2001.
oh
I
my god.
I want my copy. Give me my Mass Effect.
I hope that it comes soon and that it's everything you ever dreamed of. I'm really
God,
excited about it.
please. Yeah, I hope. In serious talk, I really want everybody to be able to play this game. I really want um, everyone to enjoy it and have a great time with it, because Eric and I worked super hard. We're both really proud of it. It is honestly one of my favorite games. Like there was a moment, like I was neck deep in playtesting. It was 4 a.m. I just finished collating the playtest report. I was like, oh, I'm so tired. I need a break. I want to play Mass Effect, and I just booted up the game on Tabletop Simulator and played it. After doing like a 4 hour playtest, after doing like a day of designing on it, it just felt it just booted up and playing it because I like it so much. Yeah,
That is fantastic. I'm really, really happy to hear it. So
yeah.
for those of you who are out there, follow Calvin, look out for Mass Effect, and as usual, like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.